Hello, everyone. You are seeing the first half of today's session, which did not get recorded. So I am redoing it. And we started off the session by introducing a newcomer. This is Rudy from next door, his mother. You've met him many times here in our studio audience. And his mother's from New Jersey. She is out here visiting, but this is a previous visit last a few months ago when Rudy and Debbie celebrated their 50th anniversary, and we had a good chat then. And she's joining us today from Malibu. So welcome, Sonia. So David Pepper sent me some cool maps of measuring air pollution. You can find these maps on this website. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about it. So I'm very sorry that we didn't catch the original audio. The EPA and Fresno and David spent many years in Fresno as a doctor, and Homer has experience with air pollution in Fresno as a pulmonologist. So they had a nice give and take, which unfortunately is lost to posterity. This is a look at the particulate matter. You can specify, you can play with it and watch hurricanes. And David got a shot of the Canadian fires, how they map onto the map of the United States, fires in general. And then he talked a little bit about the Sahara and the sandstorms, the particulate matter doesn't distinguish between the sand and the particulate of smoke. But you can see the serpent of the Sierra Sahara coming out across the Atlantic, and the source of a lot of wind conditions and hurricanes in this country. And then to cover water, so air and water. California is our theme, our major theme. We will get back to the history of California, having gone from their migration across from human migration across from Siberia and through human settlements in California, going back to the Vasco caves, first documented community 8,000 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Vasco Cave in East Contra Costa County. I hope the graphics are coming through better on the recording than they are on this computer. That's one of the problems we've had this week. We're taking it in to get it fixed tomorrow. And here, I hope you're seeing a map of the United States showing the depletion of groundwater at various states. And you can see that it covers a lot of the agricultural districts. So our reputation as a food superpower is at risk if we don't start managing our water better. This is from Bob Oxenberg. Thank you, Bob. He spotted the original New York Times article, and then California Today is the New York Times California version of articles that highlight California. And it turns out that Jim Teisel's son-in-law is the editor for that, not only for California, but also for Hawaii, as we discovered last week. So we have a son and a son-in-law that in journalism in California and Hawaii. Jeremy's still on the Big Island, but will be living in Maui for a month. And the points in the article that I highlight is that 40% of the state's water supply comes from underground. So it's like a big storage tank for us, which is fine if it's repleted in wet years to compensate for dry years. But in dry years, we can draw off 60% of our water from underground. And so the net debt in our water accounts has resulted in the following level of water level of underground water in the aquifers. And so in Phoenix, it's so depleted down there that they're not building any new homes. They can't. The other more visible damage is damage to surface infrastructure, buckling roads, cracked foundations. Many of us live on clay and see movements of the earth up and down. And unfortunately, the conclusion is our lack of foresight. It seems to be the philosophy's out of sight, out of mind. But it's not always out of sight. And the deeper we go down into the aquifer, the more likely we're to come up with interesting things like arsenic. And so also we can get saltwater intrusion from the coasts. And will make water unpalatable at some point if we don't stop it. California has made new regulations. The federal government leaves it to the states, and we've got some imaginative things going on, as we talked about in a previous episode where we focused just on California water. You can look that up in the index, which I should update pretty soon. All right, so that was California, and the political themes that we touched on. I found three spectra I keep getting attention in my periodicals: the democracy versus autocracy, nationalism versus globalism, and free markets versus corruption. So all the articles I'm talking about today touch on at least one of those, and sometimes more. The idea of nationalism, it can be a force for good, obviously, empathy for your fellow citizens. If you have a diverse nation in particular, it's good. We happen to have a very diverse nation, and we are our ability to have empathy is being sorely tested. Of course, in the 19th and 20th century, nationalism was a force against imperialism. So nations were founded to try to break loose from imperialism, and we see that even today as Ukrainians try to overcome an ambition that Russians have to reestablish the Russian Empire, the fall of which Putin thought was the greatest tragedy of the last century. I guess he was attaching this Soviet imperialism as part of the second act of Russian imperialism. The book has been written on how to make democracies work. That's something we all should be reading in this country, that you need the solidarity, and it's that solidarity that it's lacking. I see it, of course, in healthcare, the failure to have a universal coverage. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Obamacare disproportionately benefited the diverse ethnicities that are unfortunately at the bottom of the social economic scale. So the ideal would be for white Christians living in Tennessee to care as much for Hispanic atheists, the example they used, as for their near neighbor. And so politicians obviously embrace that in a positive sense, love of country. Unfortunately, there is an evil cousin, the fear and the suspicion of the other, and we can argue whether that is built into our DNA as we worked our way up from being clans to tribes, to chieftains, larger groups of social organization, mostly to protect against violence. And so there's some respects being paranoid, it has survival value. But the particular threats that have been leveraged by autocrats are forces beyond the control of individuals, and especially if they're hungry or they're poor or they're victims of climate change or violence. Into that, those situations, you can have parasitic politicians taking advantage. And that's exactly what Putin's doing when he claims Ukraine is a NATO puppet, neo-Nazis. India, you have Modi's party arguing that Muslims are waging love jihad, seducing Hindu maidens who become apostates to Islam. Tunisia's taken a pretty dark turn. It used to be during the Arab Spring the silver lining, but not so much as their president has been demagoguing Black African migrants heading north to get to Europe. Their destination isn't Tunisia, but they're going through trying to get to Europe. In our hemisphere, it's Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua, who we know from the previous decades, going back to Reagan, as being a revolutionary on the left against the Yankee empire. But today, he set up a kleptocracy with favoring his relatives. His wife is the vice president, supposed to reign after he finishes. All his sons are plugged in, and one son is famously an opera singer who insists on casting himself in the lead of Nicaraguan opera. The Economist has a very entertaining article on this family last week. And so the last thing that he has done most recently is expel the Jesuits. The Jesuits have been all along a force for the people. And you could argue whether they were against the conquistadors in the early days of the Spanish invasion of this hemisphere. The plight of the Jesuits in the 1760s is captured in this movie. Robert De Niro being a fallen creature racked with guilt, who finally sees the light and joins the Jesuit order, only in time to have Spain throw out the Jesuits. They had incited envy among other orders, religious orders, and upset and challenged the Spanish administrators, secular administrators. So Spain dealt with it by expelling the Jesuits. And what has that got to do with California? Well, nothing directly. The Jesuits set up all of the missions in Baja. But by the time Spain got to San Diego, the Jesuits had been expelled, and the role of building missions in California was given to, of course, the Franciscans. And Junipero Serra famously, his legacy and sainthood is, of course, much disputed and discussed. Ike and I saw a statue of Junipero Serra in the most unlikely of places, and that was in Havana, Cuba. So go figure. He came from Spain rather late in life. I think he was in his 50s. So the level of autocracy has been measured by many different organizations. Here, The Economist takes a crack at ranking nationalism and giving it a score, and assigning problematic places. So you can see Hungary, Russia, Zimbabwe, Nicaragua, as we just said, are rank relatively high. We'll get to another organization that ranks democracy a little bit finer, and we'll see how America fares there. So the analysis also suggests that there's an association between nationalism and corruption. And they go into detail how that might happen, the mechanisms of how that might happen. And they can be rather sneaky about it. They can not take away freedom of the press. They can just have their cronies buy the newspapers. And that's certainly what Putin has done and what Erdogan has done in Turkey. 50 countries have been deemed to have curbed civil society by this economist analysis, but it brings us to the VDEM project in just a second. So they map it out pretty neatly, and we can see that nationalism scores were kind of dropping. If time had stopped in the year 2000, we would have seen low points of nationalism. But since then, and maybe it was 9/11, maybe it was the American invasion of Iraq. I tend to think that it was, but it certainly upset Putin, and he saw where he thought he saw where we were going, and he made his first intervention in the Ukrainian elections in 2004, poisoning the Orange Revolution candidate. And so he's certainly gone up and up and up. Hungary was doing fine for a while, but Viktor Orban, suddenly things are much worse. Zimbabwe. We talked about Nicaragua, and India we've talked about. So you can see the nationalism scores. And then the corruption perceptions, kind of a little more subjective, but they have come up with ways of rating that, and you can go to The Economist and read the article. But this is the sort of excellent and creative way of imaging different concepts. So there is an association between corruption and nationalism. And I'm pretty sure I have covered where we started taping on the original. I'll, just to be sure, I'll do a little overlap. But let me just mention that autocrats have taken advantage of opportunities. So not just the resentment of our invasion of Iraq, but also the financial crisis, where we let financial institutions set up a gambling system, really, with derivatives very irresponsibly, building a house of cards and subprime. Terrible. And so we lost a lot of respect. And then people started remembering, oh my goodness, the United States, well, they they weren't a colonial power, but they certainly intervened here in Latin America. The Philippines can recall some imperialistic behavior. And this time period also saw us in South Africa evolve from the hopefulness of Nelson Mandela to the kleptocracy of Jacob Zuma. Very, very sad. And they're still recovering from that now. We have friends that live there, and having the electric lights come and the water flow is in Johannesburg is not a sure thing. So China is also seeing a vulnerability, and they're saying, the West's espousal of universal values, which would of course be anti-autocracy as personified by the Communist Party. They see that, that their espousal of universal values is actually racist. And so the competition with them continues, and some people would classify China as a paranoid nationalist. Although if you look at a map and their borders and our allies, you might see, as Henry Kissinger did when he looked at the history of Chinese foreign policy, as a Go board. So Go is a board game unlike chess. In chess, you try to kill the queen or kill the king. In Go, you just try to surround and make it hard for your opponent to move anywhere. And sometimes China may feel that's what we've done with Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, actually. And we've gone over pretty much every aspect of China since we took the Economist cover, What Does China Want?, from a little less than a year ago, and dealt with different cover stories. There have been quite a few just in the last 2 months on China's ebbing fortunes. And we've seen what they are, the demographics, their problems dealing with zero COVID. They've suffered a lot of excess mortality, departing from the mortality rate of the last 10 years, which is often the only way you can tell what the impact of COVID was. Now, some of that is indirect, the denial of other medical care for other diagnoses, but nevertheless, zero COVID maybe contributed to other deaths as well. And so their national economic output is falling. Some of that is at our hands. The trade war that Donald Trump instituted, but the other organization that is measuring the fortunes of democracy specifically is this Scandinavian institute in, I think, the University of Stockholm. And they're underwritten by a lot of national organizations, I think, including the United Nations. So they're kind of a think tank for those kind of organizations, and they're interested in democracy, and they use a pretty sophisticated way of rating democracies using these 20 indicators, and rating each country on their performance on these 20 indicators. And they do it every year, comes out about every March. And here they come and show trends. Here's one over the last 20 years. More countries are autocratizing than democratizing. Very sad development. The freedom of expression is deteriorating in 35 countries. 10 years ago, that was only 7. Government censorship worse in 47. Civil society organizations, think NGOs, are being repressed in an increasing number of countries. The independence of the electoral process is worsening in 30. And if you look at the main countries, Turkey is at the head of the list, obviously Russia, but the Philippines maybe is reversing now, more back towards democracy. But the usual suspects. And but the bottom line is we're now back to 1986, and that was the year of Chernobyl. That was the year of the Reykjavik summit between Reagan and Gorbachev. The decline is most dramatic in Asia Pacific regions. And Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, also back. And some countries have just gone off the rail to closed autocracies, and the usual list of suspects. Sadly, Mali is one of these. My next door neighbor did medical volunteer work in Mali, and it's breaking his heart. So a lot in Central Asia, and that's where Ramsey and Janet are traveling at this very moment. The number of countries that were democratizing, autocratizing has reversed. Very sad. The percent of the world population affected by this, and so these are very populous countries. Think China and India right off the bat. India, in particular, now the world's most populous country. So when there's a world opinion is canvassed on our support for Ukraine, you might have a lot of people remembering, well, the United States, they weren't that good. in the first place, and so we're paying the price. I thought that in my formative years that it was Vietnam. We recovered from that. Still kept our credibility, but I think we with Iraq and the financial crisis of 2008, we pretty much lost our standing as the leader of the so-called free world. So now we've got all these percent of the populations living in an autocratizing world, much more than it's a pretty low rate, just 10 years ago. So the state of liberal democracy, this is another map I promised you, and we're still considered in the blue zone here, but notice Mexico, obviously, Venezuela, India, Nigeria. It's all a very sad story. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum is Russia and China, and Central Asia, of course, Afghanistan. So this just gives you a clear. I hope this is coming through better on your screen than it is mine, but you can see the countries in red that are drifting towards autocracy. Here they name names, and you can see how individual countries are faring, and the major trend is heading down. So we're kind of in the age of the strong man. You don't know what age you're in until it's been around 20 years, but we're beginning to get a glimpse of what we've been living through over the last 20 years, the trends. And of course, this is a truism. How long do civilizations last? Nothing lasts forever. 336 average lifespan. We're about what, 2/3 of that. Do the math. Here are the examples, and this is I know where we stopped. So this is the last slide. I encourage you, even though I've covered all the slides, to join in for the discussion. There was lively discussion today, and unfortunately, the first 20 minutes of the lively discussion part was lost, but you'll see examples of it, and I'll just make a personal statement. I love the way this community is kind of becoming more collaborative, more interactive, and that's what a weekly Zoom session is suited for. Okay, so I think I'm gonna be able to stop recording from here. See you next week, and we'll pick up Russia and Ukraine. I want to do a little background on why Russia is different than the rest of Europe. So I look forward to doing that. Okay, so long until next time.